that's going up, and that you see you're minimizing the amount of atmosphere you're shooting through, and it's very dark. So you're able to get lots of good data. So coming to places like Blackwater Falls, which is still starting, you get Davis and Thomas and some stuff in Parsons and occasionally Elkins, but it's still dark here compared to any place else in the state. You know, this part of the state's really dark. So, and the software will blend that together for you automatically. So, and I want to finish that panel out over time. Yes?
What is the advantage of doing such a long exposure?
These were 2-minute exposures. So I took 30 frames each for each panel. You just want, you're doing two things. You're wanting to build up the signal. You know, that's still faint. You know, we can't, with our eyes, we can see, if you look at the Milky Way at a really dark location, you can see some of that nebulosity or the dust lanes, but you can't see that kind of detail that you can see with all those dust lanes. So what we're trying to do is just get as much good data as we can. And at the same time, you know, noise is random. You know, thermal noise or, you know, any other noise that might be introduced into your camera, and we're wanting to level it out. And kind of let it cancel itself out, and then amplify the signal. So the more
what
the
ISO are you shooting at?
Say that again?
What ISO are you shooting at?
2000 ISO f2 on my lens, the 85 millimeter, and 2-minute exposures. And with the new cameras, I mean, you get discussions and pros and cons or whatever. But used to, I would take dark frames and bias frames and all those different things, to fix noise and hot pixels and things like that. But the new cameras are so good. I haven't taken a dark frame for years. Occasionally I'll still do bias to fix any vignetting or things like that. But I haven't done dark processing forever. Just because the cameras are so noise free now. Because even at like ISO 2000, it's a nice clean image data. And like I said, that looks a lot better on the laptop than it does on a projector. The projector doesn't have very good dynamic range. So this was with the 85 millimeter lens, that signal, that f2. Okay, I'm not sure if there's. So here's another wide field. This is using the 85 millimeter. You can see the North American over there on the left. It's kind of on its side now. So you can see what it was with the 180 millimeter. We're kind of zoomed in. I cropped that main area out. But you can't get much more than the North American and the Pelican and the 180. But with the 85 millimeter, we're getting that as well as the Veil. The Veil nebula is over here on the right. And then up in the center, we're getting the Butterfly. This is, so where I'm looking at here is Cygnus, the constellation Cygnus. Cygnus is swamp. In the summertime, you look up, it's the big cross. If you look at the night sky, the Milky Way runs right through Cygnus. And so this is, that's the neb, the star of the neb, the bright point there. This is Sadr, S-A-D-R. Right there in the center of Cygnus. I can't remember what the other stars are, but it goes on down that way. But this is the Butterfly nebula, North America, the Veil over here, and then the crescent up here. You can see the crescent there as well. And all the pink stuff you're seeing, the reddish pink, that's hydrogen that's being ionized. Hydrogen alpha, so that's right there on the edge of our scene. It looks gray to us, nighttime, but with the camera that's been modified, that has sensitivity to the hydrogen alpha emission line, you get these nice colors. Now, if you look at the Veil nebula, you're seeing some blues in there, and that's oxygen, O3, ionized oxygen. It's called kind of the blue-green color that you're seeing over here in the Veil. Okay. So the other thing that comes into play is how big is your sensor. Some Some camera sensors have really small sensors, like for planetary imagers, they're just like a 1/4 inch or 1/3 of an inch, diagonally or square, so they're not very big. So, if you're using a wide field camera and you're using a really small sensor, you're only getting a little part of of the image that's being projected by your lens and your telescope. Whereas you have like a full frame sensor, you've got a lot of sensor area to project your image on. And this is just showing the relative sizes. So the big one, the orange, is a full frame sensor, which is the Canon RP is a full frame sensor. The next size down is the APS-C. That's common, like the Canon T series, the T3i, T4i, the T1000, the T2000, whatever. Those are all APS-C type sensors, so they're smaller than the full frame. And then you get into micro 4/3, which is the next, the first green block. A lot of astro imaging cameras are that 4/3. Some of the mirrorless cameras, kind of the consumer mirrorless cameras that you can go buy are 4/3. And then you start going down to the 1 inch, the 2/3, and then you get down to the one there, the blue, the deep blue in the middle is like one of these planetary imagers, and they even go smaller than that. So like a 1/4 inch rather than a 1/3 inch. So your sensor plays a part in your imaging as well. How big is your sensor? So you want to make sure you match up your focal length with the sensor for the appropriate field of view that you're trying to capture. Image circle. So we're using all round optics. Telescopes round, lenses are round, so they project a circle. The image that they're projecting is a circle, whereas our sensors are rectangles or squares, but mainly rectangles. So you can see that the image projecting onto the sensor, you're getting you're not capturing this part of it, we're up above, but in these areas you're not getting a full signal. That's what they call that vignette. If your image sensor is bigger than your image circle, then you hit vignette. And if you go to the next one, I'll show you a good example of that. So this is a single image. We saw M51 earlier, the Whirlpool Galaxy. That's a single image from that night's of data. You can see the image circle is smaller than my sensor in this particular setup, because I'm using that focal reducer, so it's making that image circle smaller and brighter, which is what I want. I go through the processing and I cut out, I crop my target out. So I crop out M51 and process that data and just throw away the rest of it, because there's nothing in there that I want in. So that's a good example of doing using a focal reducer on my main scope with a full frame sensor. You can see a lot of vignetting going on over there. But I don't care. All I want is the single target there in the middle, and I process those to get my final image.
Why is there a star up near the edge outside of the image
Because it's
circle?
bright. It's a gradient. It gets darker and darker and darker. And if you have something bright out in there, it'll still kind of come through.
You're getting a shadow from the circular tube of the lens. So as it gets darker towards the end.
Yeah, it gets darker and darker. It's kind of a gradient. It's not a hard cutoff. It kind of,
Yeah,
without people, with the telescope like the CA with the focal reducer, it gets.
Well, yeah, I just thought the 0.63x reducer is supposed to fully illuminate the 27 millimeter field of view for APS-C.
It will.
So that should be outside if that's on a full frame.
That's a full frame sensor. So if I put my other camera on there, it would fit inside the image circle better.
Okay, I was just wondering, is that star outside of the image circle, or it's
It's
obviously
right on the
inside?
edge of the image circle.
Okay.
It's just that it's not a hard cutoff. It's kind of a gradient. It gets darker and darker the closer you get to the edge, and then you get outside the circle completely.
Right.
So those bright stars are still kind of popping through.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Yes.
Do you have to finish all your stacking before you crop?
I crop first. A couple reasons. My final data is, I can go through all that process, and my images that I save are smaller because I'm cropping out stuff, and it goes much faster, significantly faster to do the processing. Yes.
What's the relationship between the sensor size and resolution? And aren't you losing resolution when you crop?
Yes. Yes. So there's all kinds of factors that go into that. So when I crop that out, so this is like a 28 megapixel camera, I think 28. I have to look. It's in the upper 20 megapixel range for the RP. When I crop that, my final image is probably only going to be 4 or 5 megapixel. But that's okay for what I was trying to get. In order to, if I wanted to have more resolution, I would go to the longer focal length, 2,000 millimeter. But then I would have to start taking 3 or 4 minute exposures, and then I'm pushing the extent or the limit of my mount. I don't have the greatest mount in the world, so if I start really doing long exposures like that, then I start having to, even if I'm guiding, there'll be issues with my tracking and things like that. So I'm kind of, I might have to throw away more of my images because I can't use them because I've got, elongated stars and things like that. So I use the focal reducer to get, so I can reduce my overall exposure time. Even though the image is smaller, it's brighter. And I still, even at that resolution, you can still see lots of detail. And you can see that when you see it on the screen. The other one is what's the pixel size. So you could have like a 50 megapixel sensor, which you can get now, a full frame, 50 megapixel, and you crop that sensor out. Now it's going to be like an 8 megapixel crop instead of a 4 megapixel crop because I have twice as many pixels in my full frame. So the pixel size goes into that as well. The thing that we as astrophotographers want, we don't like small pixels. We want big pixels. One of the best low light cameras is like the Sony A7S III, 2, something like that. Full frame sensor, 12 megapixel. So half the resolution of what I'm using, but the pixels are huge. So they're like big light rods. So they can catch a lot of photons. Whereas if you have really tiny pixels, photons might not, they might be coming in and they're just not getting photons hitting that pixel, or they're more random than if I have a bigger pixel sitting there catching more photons. So pixel density, pixel size is also important. It goes into the factor as well, yes.
So if you have like a 1.25 inch focuser, you're saying it's better to use a full frame camera that's vignetted than an APS-C camera that's fully illuminated?
It depends on the camera. I use Canon. That's all I use for my stuff is Canon. The Nikons are fine too. I just started with Canon because in the beginning Canons were better than Nikon. Nikon had some issues.
So you have like two equivalent sensors, just one's full frame, one's APS-C.
And from a sensor perspective,
yeah.
the consumer grade, the sensors are fine, and a lot of my pictures, some of the pictures I've been showing are on an APS-C type sensor, and they're fine. I would shoot with one tonight, without any issues. The Canon R series, the mirrorless, it's based on the Canon. It's the same sensor of the Canon 6D Mark II, which is a really good sensor. It's got lower noise. It's got nice big pixels. And it's a step above the consumer grade. It's more of a professional grade camera sensor versus the consumer grade, which you get like the T3i, T4i, T5i, the APS Type C sensors. They're for mass market, whereas the other ones are more professional for professional photographers. So they're a little bit better quality.
So like the new R10 versus the older RP. One's APS-C though. So say the APS-C on that photo would be fully illuminated. That wouldn't be as good as the vignetted with the full.
I'd have to see what the new sensors, what the pixel density and stuff is. There's a lot of these factors that go in. Some really great cameras, for doing action sports and stuff like that, might not be good long exposure cameras for a variety of reasons. Too small of a pixel, inherent noise in the sensor. So, you try to pick the best of the best. And the 6D Mark II type sensor is really good. The Sony sensors are great. Nikon has some great sensors as well. So there's some that kind of stand out above the rest.
Yeah, like I have the SL too. I get really good low noise performance on that.
Yeah, I mean all the new cameras, from the T1i, T2i, and above, they're great. Like I said, I haven't done dark frames since I started shooting the Canon T1i, just because the noise is so much lower. So it's kind of I've just been happy with the RP. I modified it. It's got low noise.
Well, so you have to crop all the photos. That's what I was asking. Yeah.
If I'm using the C8 with the focal reducer, yes.
Yeah.
But like when I'm using the 85mm telephoto lens, it's a full frame lens, so I don't crop any of that. Like the one where it had the Milky Way, where I had those two panels, those aren't cropped at all. So it just depends on what optics you're using about whether or not you're going to have to get vignetting and have to crop. But when I'm using the focal reducer on a full frame, I do have to crop. Any other questions?
Okay, what mount are you using?
It's a Orion Sirius.
Okay. All right.
It's HEQ5 equivalent.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's pretty good.
But when you put that on there with a guide scope and 22 pounds of weights, and I'm pushing the limit of my mouth. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Is that okay? So that's what I want to talk about initially. We did have something. You asked about the ASI Air, so we could talk about that a little bit as well. But before we go down that path, because I still have a few more minutes, right?
You got the rest of the evening. You got the whole night.
Any other questions about just astrophotography in general? Yes.
For planetary, do you ever use a dispersion corrector for your planetaries?
No, I never tried that. And I don't have it with me here. It's out in the car. But for my planetary, I can either use the Canon RP, and I just take video, or I can use the Canon T3i or T5i.
I have a Canon RA.
And take video. So I've done that. That Jupiter image that you saw was with the Canon RP.
Okay.
I've got another one that I can show you real quick. It was done with an ASI 224
Planetary.
image. It's designed for doing planetary.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah, and you can see you can see it better. Yes.
Since you're using a color camera, do you use filters like the O3 filter, hydrogen alpha filter?
I do. I don't have individual filters, but what I do use is a dual band filter, which has a O3 line and a hydrogen alpha line. And I mainly do that because where I live between Huntington and Charleston, in Taze Valley. Light pollution every month it gets worse. So we're fighting light pollution down there. So if I want to image anything long and deep, I have to use that filter to get rid of light pollution. Up here, you don't need to use unless you're doing narrow band imaging, and you can do that you can even do that with a color camera. You just have to, in your processing, you need to know that, hey, if I'm doing hydrogen alpha, and all I'm getting is a red signal, and you just need to deal with that in processing, post-processing, to combine that stuff.
What brand of filters do you use? Is it Optimum or?
I'm using the SCT.
Okay.
I couldn't get the alcohol. Nobody had when I was looking for that. And a friend of mine, Jeff Ball, some of y'all might know Jeff. He's a professional astrophotographer, and he had been using the SCT. And I ordered it directly from Hong Kong, and I got it for like a week. That's a nice filter, yes.
Oh, so how do you, is the coma noticeable or a problem without the correcting lens on the SCT?
Yeah. If you look on the edges, those stars don't look nice. They're not pinpoint stars.
Okay, so that's annoying, or?
I crop it out.
You crop it out,
Now,
okay.
with the lenses, telescopes cause coma. Some telephoto lenses have bad coma, but that Nikon, that 180mm, is great all the way to the edge. Those Sigma lenses, especially the 85, pinpoint stars all the way to the edge. The 24, really wide frame, you start getting some coma around the edges, but it's not bad.
So like on the SAT, how far out do you usually crop to get rid of the coma?
I crop just, typically I'm just cropping the center. And
Almost
throw
like an
away-
APS-C kind of?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Just because, because I'm not using a flattener as a corrector on that SAT. So it's, you definitely get nice little comet-looking things around the edge. Yes?
Amazing images, by the way. On the Jupiter one, how do you get that image if you have to throw away so many and just stack the good ones? Because Jupiter is such a dynamic subject with the fast rotation.
You got
and
2
the
minutes.
moon moving.
Jupiter, you got 2 minutes. And if you go beyond 2 minutes, you're going to get blurry because it's rotating so fast. So I don't ever go over two minutes. But if I'm capturing at 100 frames per second, at 2 minutes, that's, I can't do the math right now in my head. But, that's a lot of, 10, 15,000 frames, individual frames. And I'll throw away half of those or two-thirds
It's
of
a
those.
lot faster than I imagined.
So I'm getting lots of frames. And then, so I'm processing typically 2, 3, 4, 5,000 frames to get that final image for planetary.
There's also some de-rotation software if you do go beyond it. It's free as well.
Yeah, so I've heard people using that, but I've never done that. And I've heard some people they'll do the 2 minute ones. They'll do like 3 or 4 of those, and then they'll use that same type. Some still software that kind of
Yeah.
realigns them.
Even make it images.
So, before we jump into ASI Air, let me show some images just real quick. So I've got